All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Exit Succeed. This is Gearface, joined again by my good friend Blue. Blue, thank you so much for being here.
Hello, everyone. Well, I'm glad to be here again.
Today, Blue and I are wrapping up his court mandated season seven guides with Baiken. Really, really excited to learn a little bit about her. I understand that Blue is the person to talk to. Really looking forward to this one. Um, in my uh, in my capacity as an esteemed host, I haven't looked at her cards even once since the set came out, so I'm ready to learn. A couple disclaimers before we get started. Number one, as always, we're going to be talking about playing to win on this show. You don't have to play Exceed to win. Exceed is a fun game. You can play it for fun. You probably should. Sometimes it's fun to throw cards around with your friends and not worry about playing to win. But if the lines of play that we're describing on the show don't sound fun to you, please don't play that way. Play in a way that you do find fun. Also, we are pretty prescriptive about strategy on this show. Blue less so than some others, but you will probably hear him say, always do this, never do this. This is always the right decision in this position, things like that. Take all that with a grain of salt. Exceed's not a solved game. This character's fairly new still. There's still a lot more room to develop Baiken, I think. Um, so take everything that we're saying with a grain of salt. Blue's an expert, but his opinion is just a very informed one. Um, and finally, if you are brand new to Exceed, this is your first character guide, your first time looking at these cards. Welcome. If you came in here from Guilty Gear Strive, happy to have you. You may hear us refer to a couple of cards, Slash and Dust, as names you're not familiar with, Assault and Spike. They're the exact same card. They are just from the many, many other seasons of Exceed that you can try out at your leisure, and I encourage you to because they're kind of cool. But yeah, all that said, Blue, tell me a little bit about Baiken.
All right, so as usual, let's start with the ability. Unlike with all the other Season 7 characters that I personally did lessons for, Sol, May, and Giovanna, Baiken's
Yeah.
ability isn't actually, huge for her. Really, what Baiken's ability represents is her overall playstyle, which is, you cannot escape from me. We are going to be playing in melee, where normals and the like work. Let's compare PP sizes, and mine is bigger than yours.
Okay. Sounds good. Sounds good. So I'm not going to be using my ability as part of a combo or part of a value engine the way that other characters we've discussed are. This is here for when my opponent makes me use it.
Yeah, this is a tool. This is a tool that means that no matter what, you can force the opponent into melee. Because similar to Iron Tiger from Season 5, Blaze Blue, you have basically the same ability. But notably, unlike Iron Tiger, you do not have any weird mobility restrictions placed upon you. You're a regular ass character that has Iron Tiger's magnetism afforded to you.
So we could, for example, if we're here, this is a scary enough range that I'd be worried about fighting Ryu here. Awesome. Pull two, dive. Now we're at range one, uh, pretty much across the entirety of the board. It's very, very hard to get away from Baiken.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a similar kind of economic restriction on Baiken? Like, does she have enough difficulty building gauge to Tager that I should be sort of rationing my ability and only using it when absolutely necessary?
You probably will be rationing your ability for other reasons, but it's not really that you lack for gauge. Spoilers, you have plenty of essentially free ways to build gauge if that is something that you desire.
Right.
You
So I
also
should
have
treat.
more regular shapes than the grappler shapes that Iron Taker or Potemkin for you Strive players might have in their kit. Although Potemkin actually does have some decent confirm on tools like Slidehead.
Yep, sure. So I'm using this as an anti-zoner tool. I'm using this if I just happen to get out of position and need to use something in my hand, but I won't be crutching on it too much.
Yes.
Um, how about my exceed ability?
So you may look at your exceed and go, wow, this is 3 and it has an implicit cost of 1 gauge, so 4 cost to be able to even have an ability when I flip. No
Right.
kicker, no when you exceed effect, and all it does is change it from a pull 2 without pulling past you to a pull 2 period, and then gives me +1 power. Wow, I'm paying effectively 4 gauge for a slightly different pull that isn't actually, in terms of magnitude, better and +1 power. That seems lackluster. Remember what I said about being able to build gauge without too much difficulty? That's why your exceed mode is numerically somewhat expensive for +1 power. I would still consider it to be a tool, mostly because Baiken actually has some pretty interesting uses for gauge otherwise, but it's a tool that is deceptively accessible for this character if you feel like you need slightly more power to kill the opponent in the PP size war.
Okay. So it's not an every game consideration. It's not an every matchup consideration, but I will find use for this. It's in competition with the rest of my tools.
Yeah, and it's deceptively affordable despite that, if it is something that you desire.
Okay. And the pull two rather than pull two without pulling past yourself, this would allow me to corner my opponent. It would allow me to set like range two from range one. Um, but I'm also noticing that like if I want the bonus power, I have to pull. It's not optional. I can't if I'm at a range that I already want to be at, if I'm at range one and I'm hugging range one, I may slightly deposition myself from what I'm trying to do. Is there any awkwardness there, or do you just kind of have to play your hand?
There is a little bit of awkwardness there. Once we get into the cards, I want you to keep that thing in mind about range 1 and range 2. Just keep in mind the threats that we see that are available at those ranges and what they offer the character. And
Okay.
we'll see how much the positioning awkwardness of switching polarity between range 1 and range 2 is necessarily for the character.
Okay, sure. And it sounds like we should probably be getting into the kit itself pretty fast here. It sounds like she's a fairly attack focused character.
She is a very kit focused character. And unlike a lot of other Guilty Gear characters, she actually is able to play at a somewhat more slow pace than a lot of them. Her pants are not necessarily on fire if you don't want them to be.
Okay.
So, with that in mind, let's get right into the attacks. Let's start with one of my favorites, the Tamigaishi, also known as All Reliable, because let's look at that stat line. 1 to 3, the printed range of sweep, which is basically the gold standard for this is a card that hits at a decent spread of ranges.
Right.
4 power, 4 speed, so middling stats there, but 1 armor and 4 guard. So we have 5 effective defenses at 4 speed. This is a card that is almost impossible to crack without
Yeah.
some specific offensive setups being thrown at you. And that means that this card effectively has the mysterious property of never losing. You can defend with it in a lot of matchups. You can initiate with it in pretty much every matchup. And there's a reasonably good chance that you'll hit, and if you don't hit, you will at least make up distance with the after close 2.
Right. So, I mean, my like threshold, I think a lot of people's threshold for safety and exceed is like, eh, I mean, 2 and 6, 2 speed, 6 guard, that's very safe most of the time. Focus obviously is very safe, but like 4 and 4, 4 speed, 4 guard, yeah, that's probably safe enough. Like donkey kick, that's a pretty safe card. I'll throw that at range two, something like that. So just having that little extra armor actually does amp it up over kind of like a safety threshold. This is very hard to stun. Um, it's not. It doesn't look like overwhelming. It's just kind of a thing that you can press anytime you want, and you get
Yeah,
stuff out of it.
yeah, and because you have at least one extremely stable defensive option within your kits, that is what I mean when I say that Baiken's pants are not necessarily on fire. We have, at the very least, Tamigaishi to fall back on if we ever are just not sure what the opponent is playing and we don't really want to lose the strike and we don't really care about winning it 100%.
Right. Okay. And so this will set range one or range two pretty much. I guess it could set range three as well, right? You do one, two. It's all right, guys. I can figure this out. I've done 70 of these lessons. So you go here, you go here. Yeah, you're going to be setting range two at most.
in
So
a lot of
and
matchups, if the opponent crosses out at range 2, they retreat to range 5, and then you close 2 to range 3.
right,
So range
sure.
3 is a also relatively common result of the strike. If the opponent plays to make tatami whiff, but even in the whiff, you only took 2 from that cross and you recovered distance. So you can
And you
kind of think
recover
of it
distance,
as
right?
a very efficient source of grappler movement, which is even if you don't hit the opponent and get value that way, you spent 2 life to make up 2 forces worth of distance. So you effectively changed out life for force while
Right.
still chasing the opponent.
At a pretty reasonable rate of exchange. That sounds pretty good. And as you were saying, I mean, it sounds like from the little spoiler that you gave me that I kind of want to be at range 1 or range 2. So this is a way to do that fairly easily.
Yeah, and we already see that we have at least one tool that is very good at range 1 and pretty reasonable at range 2 and 3 at forcing trades
Right. Sure.
just off of the Tamagaishi.
At just saying I mean, as you said, on offense or on defense, there's really no way to avoid me getting some kind of value out of this card, even if I whiff. I'm getting something that I want.
And that's I forgot to even mention the hit push one draw one. So it also slightly pushes the opponent towards the corner and then you chase. This does have some funny interactions where if you play this card at range 3 and the opponent played spike, you push them to range 4 and then you close to range 2. So you trade with the spike, but you're trading 4 for 5. And if the opponent initiated with spike and you hit them, built gauge, and traded just about even with them, and if you account for the draw, you basically traded even with them, you're chilling. That's not really a loss.
Yeah,
And the opponent used up a spike.
if we're already okay with the idea of trading life for forces, spaces of movement in force, like that exchange rate is already implicitly built into this card, then card draw also adds to that. We've talked about goodness points on a couple of these lessons now, Blue. Um, if I'm trading with Spike or Dust,
Yeah, it
uh,
does.
one card draw is kind of like one damage on my opponent. Like there is some kind of exchange rate built somewhere into cards into damage. There's those are somewhat fungible sometimes, or they feel like they are. So like
They definitely are, yes.
I I am trading better than I think into basically everything then.
More or less, yeah. And that's
Okay.
why I called it old reliable, and that's why I started with it because uh even at the worst of times, if you got a Tatami Gaishi in your hand, you probably have a competent defensive option available to you so long as you're at range 1, 2, or 3. And even further out than that, it can be used as anti-zoning. It's not the most appealing use of it, and obviously it's not a use that you're dying for, but it is a use that exists.
Right. I mean, you combine it with your character ability, and now we're back in the mix. I mean, like just like I did with dive on the demonstration a second ago, I can make up a lot of ground with a little bit of close and a little bit of close movement and a little bit of pull.
All right, well, with everything said about Tatami Gaishi, let's move on to our next. I'll call this the anti-zoning trilogy of Baiken, Kabari.
Okay.
Wow, this character has a fast dive of sorts. It isn't actually a fast dive, it's a projectile, but it's a projectile that has hit pool 3 on it, so it has fast dive-esque properties. But after you get your hit pull, which notably means that you don't pull focus, you now have a decision to make. Advance 2 and gain advantage. So this card is kind of like assault but long, and otherwise +2 power. So this is either a 2 to 4 5/5, which is pretty chunky as far as stats go,
Oh
or
yeah.
a 2 to 4 3/5 with hit advance 2 and gain advantage. That advance 2 and gain advantage also means, in combination with the hit pool 3, means that this card has some slightly different properties relative to Slash, uh, in that Slash leaves you at range 1 if it hits and gains advantage, period. This
Right.
will usually leave you at range 2 if you choose to advance 2 and gain advantage with it. That means that say the opponent, where's our training dummy? Say the opponent is cornered, or you're cornered and the opponent is at range 3. If you play Kabari and you pull them in and then you advance 2, well, congratulations. Now they have their back towards the corner.
Right. Okay. and I'm happy with that range. Uh, just like I'd be happy with slash. Like range 1 and range 2 are both okay for me. But the and also, I mean, I can do this at after reveal, right? I know what my opponent's
Yes,
playing. I know if I have to stun the thing or not.
yeah, you get to decide. Oh, the opponent played the opponent played slash or dive, and you speed tied them. Oh well, then I'll just like take the advantage. I want the advantage in positioning rather than the power. Let's say you play this at range 4 and you run into a focus. You didn't pull that focus. You take that plus power. You don't even you don't stun the focus, but you don't have to trade with the focus. You deny them the hit, and you get to decide which is more valuable to you in that instant.
Right,
So this is also a deceptively safe opener because it only trades with things like Tatami Gaishi or Sweep.
right.
It trades with specific cards, and you still get to choose what kind of value you're getting out of the strike after the facts.
Okay, okay. And also, I mean, it's an above curve option at 4. That means, I mean, independent of its use in Guilty Gear Strive, the board game, where everybody seems to have a fast dive. This would be in many other seasons a pretty good defensive option. So sometimes, if I'm using it on defense, I don't even care about the advantage because I'm probably taking the next turn anyway. That now it's just free power, or I guess it's free power versus advance 2. So there might be still like the positional requirement that I would be trying to fulfill. But
There might be
I could,
times that you would want the positioning, but yeah, let's say you decide to defend on curve using Kabari at range 3 because you're expecting a dust or a dive.
right,
Well, congratulations. You don't need to trade with dust, and actually you hit harder than Slash does into the dust when that happens. You straight out stun the dust if that ever matters because you're hitting it for 5, which exceeds its printed guard of 4.
right. Okay, so very flexible range 3 to 4. It sounds like option. Is there a reason to use it at range 2, or it's just kind of like, well, it hits there?
It hits there. It's an extra copy of Slash at that range. It's a pretty good EX at range 2 because it's on curve now and allows you to do things that you like a lot more than cross. It also serves as a pretty reasonable mix-up option if you're threatening an EX with, for example, Badass, the boost on sweep,
Okay,
because you have a big dominant threat at range 2 that we're gonna talk about in a bit, and sometimes you don't have the dominant threat. And sometimes instead of cashing out the dominant threat because it turns off certain defensive options, you would rather play this card and cover some of the things that the dominant threat might not quite cover as nicely.
okay. So make them lose their defensive options early, and now you can use your big scary option later on. Now that the holes are opened up on defense a little bit, right?
Yeah, and like I'm talking about these, this is mostly a because you have a choice of how you're getting your value from it, which the dominant threat, Yozansen, uh, doesn't really have any options. It's just like here, eat this bag of stats.
Right.
You're probably going to get stunned and lose this strike. This lets you keep pressure as a mix-up option at range 2 with Yozansen.
Okay. I gotcha. I gotcha. That works for me. All right. So kind of a utility card, but a very different shape of utility card to Tatami Gaishi. I'm using this to set up specific positions or just to blow up somebody with some power, but flexible either way.
Yes.
Okay. Sounds
And,
good.
and moving on, I don't usually talk about ultras this early, and this one isn't necessarily like Tempestad on Giovanna, where it's like, oh yeah, just think of this as a special. This is actually an ultra, but it's a cheap ultra. It's a 2 gauger, and what you can really think of this as your third and fourth copies of Kabari. It's Kabari but long because it hits at
Okay.
range 5 and it's even faster, but it
Yep.
otherwise gives you almost the same value without some of the flexibility in exchange for being so fast that even fast cards sometimes just have to hold the L into this card.
Yeah, I mean,
So
we pulled our training dummy because Ryu is the default training dummy of all of these lessons. But man, having to worry about a speed 6 projectile from my opponent really sucks. I wish that I could do something. Oh, okay, I've got Kenju. Sick. So I've got, matchup specific stuff where that 6 speed really matters. Matchup specific stuff where that 5 range really matters. I'm also noticing that, like, okay, uh God, it is hard to get away from Baiken then, isn't it? Because if I pull 2, cool. Now I'm at range where this hits at least, and I'm at least setting range 3 and gaining advantage. That's almost the entire board.
Her
Okay.
screen presence is absolutely enormous if she wants to be anywhere.
Okay. Sounds good. But
And
I should mostly be using this as like, how do I put this? Is it Kabari? Is it deluxe Kabari for when I need deluxe Kabari, or is it extra Kabari because most of the time Kabari is good enough, but cheaper?
uh in some ways deluxe, in some ways extra. What it means is that neither of these individual cards have a ton of pressure placed on them for the shape specifically, which means that when we come back around to the boosts, we can more freely play the boosts on them when we feel
Okay.
like we need the value of the boosts.
Okay, so I've got a little bit of redundancy here, which would mean that Deadeye or Momentary Life, either one of them, I'm not giving up the entire utility of the card or the entire utility of the shape, as you said, by playing them. That makes sense. Okay.
And another way to think about Kenju in comparison to Kabari is, wow, we certainly do have a 4 speed that is really, really difficult to stun because it has 5 effective guard and a just straight up 6 speed. This character is already a defensive monster just off of these 2 cards alone.
Yeah. Okay. So this feeds into the thing you were saying earlier about being able to play at a slightly slower pace, where I actually can, like, shocker. I apologize for blaspheming. Pass the turn to my opponent.
Crazy idea, yeah.
That's
That sometimes you can let the opponent play the video game.
I don't know if I like this, Blue. You're gonna have to sell me on this because right now I'm feeling like Baiken might not be for me just based on that alone. I mean, I say that, but I love Street Fighter, right? I love the footsie season of Exceed a whole lot. So should I be thinking about her kind of like a transplant from an earlier season of Exceed? Does she sort of play like that?
I think she plays a lot like a Street Fighter character. I think she actually plays a lot like specifically kind of a mixture of Ryu, Ken, and Guile, just kind of all mashed together in different ways.
Okay, so big scary mix-up options, good defense, and uh a lot of rushdown potential.
Yes, and right now we've covered the things that offer the character stability and spoilers, the thing that also offers the character crazy snap plays in the form of their boosts, which we'll loop around to later.
Okay.
So let's talk about the spice.
Yes, please.
Yo, I already mentioned that it's a dominant threat. Why is it a dominant threat? Well, we're going to start seeing this text on these coming cards. If you have 3 or fewer cards in hand stats,
Right.
those are not universally active, but if you want them to be active, they are active. So we can treat these as usually having that 3 or fewer cards in hand rider, and think of Baiken as more a character that is usually going to play with like a card hand that has like 4 or 5 cards in it, sometimes even down to 2 or 3, but usually 4 or 5 is easier to hover around and more comfortable.
Okay. And this effect rider would be checked at reveal timing. So if I have 4 cards in my hand, I put down Yozan-sen, we flip, I reveal it. I have 3 cards in my hand at that moment. I have +2 speed.
That is correct.
Okay. So that's not as. And if I put an EX down, I do it from 5 in hand. Like I've got or a cancelable boost down, and I do it from 5 or maybe even 6 in, or 4 or 5 in hand. I have a couple ways to dip my hand size flexibly. It sounds like.
That is correct, and you're cooking. Are you sure you haven't already read Baiken or had a Baiken guide from someone else?
Absolutely
Because
not.
those are
How Blue? How dare you imply that I have any kind of knowledge about this game?
very
I
true. But those are
I thought we were
exactly why
friends.
your hand is going to be at a middling size, but it's also, if you want this, you will have it, period, for that exact reason. You can pretty reasonably control how many cards in your hand so that these effects are live when they're relevant. With that
Okay.
in mind, this is a 1 to 2, 5, effectively speed 6 with ignore armor. That is
It's axe
for,
kick.
yeah, that is for the old heads in the audience. Ken's axe kick with a slightly different activation condition relative to Ken's axe kick. And just like with axe kick, if dive is the normal that most likes having boosts applied to it because small stat buffs make this card go crazy, Yozansen is kind of like dive double triple deluxe. This is the card that everyone dreams they had to play boosts on, because +1 power, as printed, it beats block straight up. It destroys block. It also destroys dust because it hits for 5 at a speed that
Right.
is faster than dust.
Right.
If you add a single point of power onto it, which we already saw our exceed mode, we have at least one source of plus power that it gives us exactly +1 power. You can also play at EX, which we have badass to do that, and then we also, spoilers, have a different way to get +1 power onto it. This now beats focus. If we get up
Yep.
to +2 power, then that hits for 7 at speed 6 with ignore armor. That means
That's an
that the
ultra.
only things that's ultra, and also that means the only things that actually trade with us anymore are EX attacks, and not just any EX attack, EX sweep. The one that is generally speaking the hardest for characters to actually represent as a threat.
Right. Right. All right. So and yeah, like there are things when you look at Dust, for example, and you're talking about the things that Yozansen stuns, and you're like, yeah, I mean, sweep focus, that's hard to stun, but you have some kind of command grab chip. This is speed 6. This is an on curve button that with boosts down can deal with these, like the premier hard to stun cards in Exceed. And also, on curve ignore armor is a game closer, right? That's
It
just like,
certainly is. That
okay,
is a very easy way to say, "Oh, I see that you're at like insert number up to 8 here. Goodbye."
yeah, that's really scary. I gotta say,
It
that's
is really, really scary.
all right. And how how freely, again, we'll get into this in a second, I'm sure, with boosts and stuff. I have a couple different sources of bonus power. Uh my how do I put this? My gauge, it sounds like might be for my exceed mode, sometimes might be for my ultras sometimes. Am I the kind of character who might be throwing down a couple of cancelable boosts onto a card and cashing out a decent amount of gauge to make one attack like just dumb? Or is that not really the play pattern that Baiken encourages?
That is a play pattern that you can do with Baiken if you desire. Usually, you're actually not going to be worrying too much about your gauge in those instances, because a lot of the things that you do in that big dumb cancel chain are going to be taking extra cards out of your hand for reasons we'll get into in a little bit. So you're actually mostly taxing your hand. Oh wait,
Oh, right. But by taxing my hand, blue, wait a minute. I can get down to below 3 cards in hand, and suddenly all of my offense is enabled. So as you said before, I'm kind of hovering in that little sweet spot where I can easily dip down into 3 with a two cancel chain or something like that, and now suddenly uh, blow them to smithereens with Yozansen.
yes, that is something you can do with Yozansen. It's also just like sometimes you need a speed 6 option, or sometimes you have the EX, which throwing this EX sucks for the same reason throwing EX axe kick sucks. You win the strike, but you lose the war, and you probably are going to need to take a reshuffle action soon. But luckily for Baiken, her defense game is competent enough that she doesn't necessarily need to do that a lot, and also her defensive game is competent enough that she can afford to take a turn off to just reshuffle if she needs to refresh her options. So considerations.
Okay.
And
Okay.
another way to think of your exceed mode, because you mentioned it as a use for gauge, is this is effectively a cancelable boost that does not cost a card in hand.
A
So
card from hand.
if you already have what you want in hand, you can think of this as being basically a +1 power now strike, canceled, auto canceled.
Okay. Okay. And that also gives me more flexibility in terms of getting to that 3 card limit. Where like, all right, I need 2 cancels in order to to make Yozansen hit some crazy breakpoint, but I only have enough cards in hand. I'm not going to hit 3. I'm going to hit 2, and that's not efficient. Well, I could just use my exceed mode, get power that way, use 1 cancelable boost, and now I've hit that 3 card sweet spot that way. So it just gives me a little bit more flexibility. Um,
Yeah, more or less. And
okay, okay,
just having a way that you can buy power whenever you want is pretty useful. That's the big selling point of the exceed mode, along with, as mentioned, the character's defensive game is solid enough that just passing turn to the opponent and letting them deal with the fact that you now have as much +1 power as you could ever desire, and also way more incentive to actually use your ability, which means running away is that much harder for the opponent if they now really feel the need to run away.
Right, because now I'm also getting bonus power. I'm incentivized to use this because it's actually just a better strike sometimes. Um, Woe betide any zoners who I run into now. Um, okay, so it's axe kick. I feel like axe kick needs no introduction if you know it, but if you don't, it's axe kick. It's really scary.
Yeah, what you may not know Axe Kick, but you've met his cousin, and she's just as mighty and just as fierce,
Yep,
thanks to the way that Baiken's kit is built, in the same way that Ken's is built to enable lots of Axe Kick shenanigans.
sounds good. Okay.
Now, speaking of Axe Kick shenanigans, let's talk about the other side of the Yozansen threat. So let's say the opponent has some kind of Dragon Punch, a Speed 7 card that hits at range 2. Well, say hello to my good friend Hiragi.
Oh my god.
This one this one is kind of funny because you don't necessarily actually need to play this with 3 or fewer cards in hand. It just is extra value if you do. This is a dominant threat at all times, and the reason why is because it is, if the opponent is faster than you, a card that hits for 7.
Yeah, that's too many number on a card. I mean, like for a special for no investment of any kind, for no, you're not. It's not a Rekka. You're not pumping force into it. It just hits for 7 all on its own. That's nuts.
Yeah, and all it requires is for the opponent to be faster than you, which notably is a real quote unquote cost because this is speed 3. So if the opponent wants to underspeed, they have lots of options to underspeed. Focus, sweep, block. Wait a second. Those are all
Oh,
those things that lose to Yozansen.
oh no. So, interesting. So, I don't like, other than just like nice trading value from the armor, I don't really get anything from going to 3 cards or fewer in my hand when I'm using Hiragi. But I kind of do because the other side of the mix up is enabled by it. They're going to be way more afraid of Yozansen when I get to 3 cards in hand, and that will enable some Hiragi plays.
Exactly. And because the value that you get on Hiragi, which notably two armor and 6 guard means this card is basically impossible to stun.
Yeah.
So it's also just an extremely stable defensive option that the character can represent at low hands that taxes the opponent's ignore armor specifically. Uh, and also it has huge range. It hits 1 to 4 if the opponent hits you first. So it's
Right.
extremely hard to escape as well. All those properties mean that the opponent is pretty much always going to be afraid of Hiragi to a degree, because what if they hit me for 7?
I'm afraid of that, and I'm not even playing Baiken right now. Like that's I'm already worried. Um, that is a threat. It is a threat enabled by Yozansen, but honestly, this card alone sounds really scary.
Yeah, this is actually the other thing that the kit is built around, because Baiken's identity in the source can really be boiled down to the crazy offensive threat of Yozansen, the pure reliability and universal applicability of Tatami Gaishi, and then Hiragi in Strive is standing in for an entire legacy of defensive threats,
Of
all
counter
boiled
hits,
down to
right?
one. It used to be guard cancels, meterless guard cancels, so you had to pressure the character in very specific ways because of that. Then it got changed into a parry stance that went into cancels, and then it became Hiragi. And I'm kind of happy it did, because it made making the character and exceed much easier, because we got to boil down that entire legacy into a catch parry that hits for fucking 7.
Yeah, let's just make this one card as cracked as possible in order to represent this legacy on the character. Okay. So this should be strong because it's Baiken, and Baiken needs that represented in her kit.
Yeah.
Okay.
And similar to what I was saying with the Tamigaishi and Kenju, here's another stable defensive option, and notably a stable defensive option that covers for what Kenju and Tamigaishi might lack.
Right,
So
which is just blowing the opponent up.
yeah,
Um
now not only do we have a pretty just stable option to just press, not only do we have a relatively fast option to press, we also have this absurdly threatening slow to press, which means even if the opponent is choosing the rules of engagement by striking into us, they have to account for the fact that we have a triangle of extremely strong defensive threats that are very hard to cover simultaneously.
Okay. Okay. And all on defense, all without much commitment on Baiken's end. She just gets to do these things. Um, is this how do I obviously I want to hit with this, and I want to hit with the +6 power. There shouldn't be a +6 on anything in Exceed, man. But obviously I want to hit with this. I win on speed ties. And I don't want to win on speed ties because that means that I'm not getting all of my crazy power on top of it. But the thing that I would be speed tying with is dust that would beat it. How do I do I always want to defend with this card, or are there times when I want to initiate with it just as a pressure button?
Obviously, my answer to that question is going to be different than a different Baiken's answer. My answer to that is that um, I use it on offense and on defense because I want the opponent to know I'm crazy and I'm willing to do anything, even these very likely to fail plays like initiating with Hiragi. Because
Right.
if they know that, then it starts working.
Right. And now they're afraid to press or now they need to represent these on defense more often, which gives you Yozansen coverage. Now you've got some fun
Gives me
mix-ups to
Ozansen
play.
coverage, and also the card that we are going to get to next, which is Karata Kawari. This is basically I mentioned Iron Tager before. This is basically a kind of nerfed version of Iron Tager's gigantic Tager driver. It is a mid speed that hits for 7. Remember what I said about Yozansen being pretty easy to beat focus, but you have to put a little bit more into beat sweep? Well, this just beats sweep at range 1. It hits for 7, it stuns the sweep, assuming you have low hand, but like if you're playing this at low hand. It is a 7 power attack.
Okay.
This also
Interesting.
notably means that we have a mix-up of, am I going to hit you for 7 at mid speed, or am I going to hit you for 7 at low speed? Am I playing to lose to fasts, or am I playing to beat the shit out of fasts as hard as possible?
Right. All right. So I have sort of like in addition to that really strong defensive mix-up that you were talking about a second ago, I also do have this like nested second mix-up that I can throw between these two cards.
And this mix-up is equally as potent on defense as it is on offense because, I mean, this card is just nuts, and this
Right.
card is speed 4. It outspeeds most of the relevant things at range 1, which would be the slows, and then it loses to the fasts. So it is actually. Do you want to lose to Hiragi by initiating with slash, cross, or grasp, or do you want to lose to Karatakawari by initiating with sweep, or I don't know. Like I guess I get to at least trade 5/4 into focus with
Right.
this otherwise somewhat low value card. So pick your poison on the range 150/50, as it were. And
I
then
also
sometimes you can just say, I'm not really feeling it, and play
I'm
Tamagaishi instead.
I'll just do the value button instead. I also just noticed that Hiragi at range 1 catches cross.
It certainly does, because it's a 1 to
that's
4 attack.
that's the funniest cross catcher of all time. That's really scary, Blue. Is there any gameplay reason why the formatting on these two if you have 3 or fewer cards in hand riders is different than the one on this card? This is at hit timing. Do I have any ability to influence that?
Glancing at the kit. No. The reason why this is all baked into the hit trigger, whereas this is a passive and this is a passive, is if you look at these passives, this passive takes up roughly 2 lines of text.
Oh, okay.
And
So to,
this, if you bake it into the hit effect, takes up 2 lines of text versus if it was a passive, it would take up 3 lines of text.
right, okay.
Just a bit of efficiency in formatting.
Okay, I gotcha. So, but it does mean that if I put on, I don't know, faultless defense and I'm fighting Gordeau, all of a sudden I can confirm this card at a higher hand, and clearly that's going to be the difference maker in that matchup.
Yeah. Ignoring that Gordo's mix-up is a mix-up that mostly beats cards that are shaped like Karatakwari, even if they have guard on them.
Wait, you
But
can't hold
Gordo
on.
really hates Hiragi.
Hold up, you can't move during strikes and exceed, Blue. That's not fair. Mortal Slide, and Mortal Glide aren't real cards. Okay, so this is, or rather, maybe these in combination are terrifying to deal with.
Yeah, all of these in combination with these makes for a character that on offense or defense, no matter who is choosing the rules of the engagement, they need to have probably invested some really real resources to be able to cover multiple sides of what you're presenting to them. And if
Okay,
they're committing more to the strikes than you are, then even if they're winning, they aren't necessarily winning. Even if you are trying to do the big low hand meme where you're always at like 3 cards in hand for these to be permanently active.
right. All right. Yeah, that's already like we haven't gotten to the boosts yet. Like just throwing these cards at your opponent and making them deal with it sounds like a game plan, right? Like we haven't talked about payouts, we haven't talked about normals or cancel chains or anything, but it seems like I can get a lot of mileage out of just making my opponent very afraid of these things.
Very afraid, and also making it so that they're essentially forced to deal with them at some point
Okay.
because they can't escape.
Okay.
Which, remember what I said, what the ability represents is not necessarily a tool that we're going to be leveraging at all times. It is what Baiken is as a whole, which is a close range, somewhat fundamentals oriented generalist with a bigger deck than you have.
Right. Who is going to make you at some point interact with the scariest mix up you've ever seen.
Yes.
Okay.
Which let's look at the last prong of that scary 3 cards or fewer mix up. Say hello to my 8 speed.
Yep. Okay. We also have a DP. You love to see it.
Uh, this also, like, if the opponent somehow has something that covers both Hiragi and Karatakwari, the odds of them being able to cover Tsurani Sanzu Watashi at the same time is very 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 low
Yeah, I don't know any
because
cards that.
it's an 8 speed. Uh, it it covers for everything else the kit might lack in that regard, which is also why it's the more expensive of the ultras. And also has a funny a setup requirement that is deceptively easy to manage, as mentioned.
Right. Okay, and like other kind of like metered reversals, like the one that we've talked about for May in Goshigawara, is this a card that I'm going to be forced to use, or is this a card that I will occasionally just like throw down to make my opponent be afraid of it? Like 3 gauge seems like a lot.
3 gauge is a decent chunk. It is non-trivial to play this, but it is much more affordable than a character like May because of how May's game plan is shaped.
Okay. All right. That's actually God. All right. So that means that I'm a character with this scary of a mix up and also not a ton of pressure on my gauge.
More or less.
Oh no. That sounds really scary, Blue. All right. So it's not trivial, but it is a consideration, but it's not a backbreaker to afford this thing.
Yeah.
And this one's pretty cheap, so even less so for that. 3 or 2 gauge is not the end of the world for Baiken, it sounds like. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So
Do we want to hop into boosts then?
yeah, let's get into why you don't have an extreme amount of gauge pressure. Now, remember how I said that this character is relatively defensively flexible, even before we account for any sort of boosts the character has?
Yep.
When we're looking at these boosts, I am probably not going to mention it unless the rule goes the other way. But pretty much all of these that have a cancel icon on them are purely about what you want to get out of them in the moment. And there is actually a lot of decision points that Baiken has to make with her boosts that have the cancel icon on them. And with that in mind, if we don't want to cancel them, we don't have to.
Okay.
We don't have our pants are not on fire.
All of these do have just regular plain old neutral defensive utility that I could make use of.
Yep.
Okay. Um
Which let's get started with the boost on Tatami Gaishi. I already talked up Tatami Gaishi, how awesome it is. Well, it's got to have a really damn good boost on it then. So let's look at it. Hidden weapon, +1 power. Now, if you have 3 or fewer cards in hand, draw 1 and take another action. That means that if you have 4 cards in hand, this is a +1 power. Now, draw 1 and take another action. because when you play it, you now have 3 or fewer cards in hand. That is
Right.
something to keep in mind. Is
Okay.
you only need to have a middling hand size, literally middling, four or less is the middle number or less, to be able to play this. And I mentioned Ken Axe Kick mix-ups. Hello and welcome to Ken's Overpower in a kit with Axe Kick. So
Okay.
even if we're not in Exceed mode, even if we don't have any other crazy shit we can do, even if we have no gauge at all, if we're at range 2 and we have a middling hand size, congratulations, we have a 6 power Yozansen.
Right. And take another action is not now strike, but it's better. Right. It's a
Yeah, it's a deluxe now strike.
right. Okay. I will often be striking with it, but I don't have to.
Yeah, and that notably means that even if the opponent is at range 4 and you do have gauge, congratulations, you now have a 6 power Yozansen threat that is action compressed that hits all the way out to range 4 effectively.
Right. Okay. So because this is an action on my turn, it's not just a strike. It's not a thing I do. So I could say like I could combo this into other stuff. I could cancel more things on top of it. This is actually very flexible.
Yeah, and notably, this means that you can also place this near the end of your funky cancel chain if you decide that you need to kill the opponent right now. And when you have the middling hand size, play this and go, oh yeah, also I hit slightly harder, and then go into a Yozan Sen or a Karatakwari or Tsurane Sansu Watashi, which going into that one is a little expensive, but the world is your oyster. You
It
are
it
Baiken
could
after all.
it could happen. It could happen. And I mean, okay, how will I have gotten to 3 hand size during that time? Oh, I'm canceling boost all over the place.
Yeah, you have
Yeah, I,
cancelable boosts, and you also have cancelable boosts that nuke your hand size in the form of Deadeye and Momentary Life. Which let's talk about those as well.
oh
So
okay. I see where you're going. Continue, please.
yeah, if Hidden Weapon is the counterpart to Tatami Gaishi, because Tatami Gaishi is basically a way to guarantee value at all times, and Hidden Weapon is a way to get specific value and then throw it onto something else that is probably guaranteed. So this is a real decision point and a pretty major one, but one that is usually going to lead to value in some form when you choose it.
Right.
Then these also are giving you different value. You're giving up a strong and relatively flexible shape in exchange for +1 speed. Now you may add a card from your hand to your gauge, a battery effect. A battery effect on a cancelable boost that also makes it so that we spend not 1 but 2 cards from hand effectively if we choose to do
Right.
that, but get a free cancel out of it if we choose to do that. So remember what I said where if we want to have our low hand size, we have it at all times? Deadeye and its counterpart on Kenju, Momentary Life, which is the same effect but with +2 armor, are the reason why. Because
Right.
if we have 7 cards in hand, we only need to boost one of these to be down to 5. One and then gauge a card. And then if we boost both of them, we're down to straight up 3 cards now. And we
Right.
have a lot of flexibility on how we're building our gauge and how we're spending our gauge because we have Deadeye and Momentary Life. We have these 2 relatively low cost for a character that doesn't mind being at a middling to low hand size anyways effects. And because we have a lot of defensive security, and these are boosts that offer even more defensive security in the form of a little bit of armor for trading value and a little bit of speed for outspeeding, we can also just use these as batteries and not cancel them. Pass turn to the opponent. We're a little bit more scary than we are by default, and we're already really damn scary by default.
Right.
And get value that way if we just want to build a little bit of gauge and play a little bit of neutral at the same time.
Okay. And I mean that particular line where we get some battery and we get some stats, because I'm not canceling into a strike or anything, I would then be drawing at the end of my turn. So that would preclude some of like the I mean, you mentioned that Hiragi in particular is an awesome defensive option when you have a lower middling hand size. It would make it a little bit more difficult to do that in particular. But yeah, I'll do +1 speed past the turn and have some gauge on top of it. I'll just get some defensive security. I'll get some armor. Are there any cards in particular that these enable, or is it flexible enough that I can almost put it on anything?
Well, flexibility is the name of the game as far as these boosts go, because these boosts are small, tiny stat adjustments that you can make action compressed if you desire. I don't need to tell you that Deadeye really loves being thrown onto Yozan Sen or Karatakori, or for funny instances, Surane Sanzu Watashi, and doesn't like being thrown onto Hiragi. And I probably don't need to tell you that Momentary Life and Hidden Weapon are great on Hiragi, especially if you manage to trick the opponent into playing something fast into it. And Yozansen. Yozansen especially loves all of these.
Okay.
Momentary life, probably the least. But you know what? Sometimes you don't have a way to actually stun that sweep, and at least now you trade better into it.
You just trade better into it. Sure, that makes sense. So kind of anything, I would be happy to cancel them. I'd be happy to not cancel them. I do need to make that decision in the moment, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I mentioned that Kabari and Kenju existing within the same kit mean that this shape is not one that we have a ton of pressure on because we have extra copies of it. You can kind of think of it as if I need to play Deadeye as a neutral tool or I need to play Momentary Life as a neutral tool, that's fine. I still have more copies of it elsewhere that I can represent. Tatami, in that regard, is a bigger decision point, but it's also a more impactful decision point if you're using it to kill the opponent from 6 or 7 health or something.
Sure, sure. Okay. That's a decision that should be important then. All right. So it also seems like my my flexible, consistent, easy to use attacks having flexible, consistent, easy to use, but hard decision making boosts seems like an intentional design decision, right? Like I'm going to be
Yep,
getting value out of these anyway I play them, but that's a lot of decisions baked into just these three cards.
it certainly is, and
Okay.
a lot of Baiken's game is going to be how you are leveraging the value offered by these attacks and these boosts in the moment. And because you have a lot of flexibility on these, backed with the rest of your kit as well, um, I don't think that there necessarily is a correct or incorrect way to play these. It is mostly going to be down to playstyle and priorities.
Okay.
How you decide that you want to use these, and that even goes for do I key charge, which you don't necessarily need to do. Which key charges use the battery effect on Deadeye or in Momentary Life? Do I choose not to do that because I don't actually want to nuke my hand size into the ground? Do I cancel? Do I not cancel? Like, there's a lot of decisions to be made with these, and I think that there's decent reasons to do basically all of them.
Okay. So I mean, yeah, this card alone is Kabari as an attack. That attack has a decision on it. The hit effect allows me to has a May on it. I can choose that. It is Deadeye, no cancel, no key charge. Uh Deadeye cancel key charge. Deadeye uh key charge. Um it
No
is
cancel.
it no
Yeah,
cancel is it's also force I could spend. So this is there are so many ways to use these cards.
there is. Probably don't spend this one as force though.
Okay. Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, I might want to talk about economy after we get done with the kit a little bit. But all right, so there's some there's some decision pressure on me when I'm playing Baiken then.
There is, but you can think of it as you have a lot of decisions to make because you have strong options and you need to choose how to use them best rather than, gosh, and if you fail, you at least have a pretty reasonable and functional character still, unless you're just
Right.
like deciding to die.
Yeah,
Um,
these are good problems to
versus,
have.
gosh, like I'm so expensive and everything is so hard to use, but if I use it right, then everything works. It's a different kind of resource pressure from some other characters in that regard.
Okay. Okay, that is encouraging that it's kind of tough to make a wrong decision, but you need to make a more right decision sometimes. It sounds like.
Yeah, it means the character has despite being relatively approachable because you have a lot of strong stuff you can just do even if you're mashing.
Right.
The character has a nice ceiling to them. Lots of room to grow and blossom into an offensive beast.
Okay. Yep, I'm in favor. Sounds good. So that those are our big, scary, flexible boosts that are going to intimidate new players with decision paralysis, including myself. Let's tell me about any means necessary.
um, Any means necessary is a way to flex on the opponent by telling them that you don't need Yozansen to kill them. It also is an
Okay.
extremely good way to make the second copy of Yozansen hit for 8.
True. Yeah. Okay. Um, tell me about this take 3 non-lethal damage stuff. Um, I don't like. Okay, I have power. I'm losing the equivalent amount of life. If I'm able to kill my opponent with Yozansen, which I sure can, because now it's an 8 power Yozansen that ignores armor. It's probably speed 6. That's really scary. I don't care how much damage I just took. But otherwise, that seems like a a null thing, is it not?
It's not a null thing because if you actually are able to confirm the value of this boost, you probably have stunned the opponent because that's what +3 power does.
Of course, yeah.
And if you stun the opponent, then you, in all likelihood, confirmed more value off of the +3 power now draw 1 than you lost in taking 3 non-lethal damage.
Oh,
This also
sure.
means
I
that in the late game, the boost is much cheaper to play, relatively speaking, because if you have 1 health, this boost doesn't have a cost anymore.
true, and
Well, it
that
does have a cost. The cost is Yozansen.
Yozansen.
I do want to make this very clear because I kind of joked about it. You don't usually play any means necessary, and that's great because it means you have very little pressure on Yozansen as a shape, which means you can represent Yozansen as an attack way more freely. Because the only thing that you need to worry about when you're managing your Yozansens is when to deploy your Yozansens.
Okay, so this is a niche play. I play any means necessary when I need to win by any means necessary. Parentheses. Those any means will not include playing Yozansen for some reason. Yozansen
Yeah,
is just really good.
you can think of it as like the bets that most Guilty Gear players can make by boosting Let's Rock, but like amped to the nth degree. So
Okay,
Let's Rock is let's play the game. I play this boost that passes turn, but if I confirm the reward, my god, is it big? Well, if the reward on Let's Rock is big for most Guilty Gear characters, including Baiken, well, the reward on any means necessary must be really, really big because it's triple the power in exchange for no gauge. A thing that we don't super need because we have a lot of ways to generate it anyways.
right. Yeah, that's messed up. Okay, but all that you know puffing this boost up aside, Yozansen is just too good. Most of the
Yozansen
time,
is really good. You're mostly going to be playing Yozansen as an attack. Sometimes the opponent forgets that you have 2 copies of Yozansen and you boost this, and then they eat 8 or 9 or something, and they feel like a chump.
right,
But if the opponent sees you boost this, if they have parry, they probably should check to see if you have the other Yozansen by parrying Yozansen. And if
right.
they didn't do that, they made a mistake.
Okay, and honestly, my opponent will not be in that situation very often anyway because I'm unlikely to be boosting this.
Yeah, yeah, you are doing a funny play to force the opponent into a very weird situation where they have to answer this threat now in some way, shape, or form. Which notably, you pass turn with this, the opponent can answer it with cross. They can just
Right,
initiate with cross.
right. And I'll play the EX Yozansen to catch. Oh, oops. Okay, so yeah, that doesn't work either. I'm not able to be totally safe. It's always going to be a mix up, but it's going to be a mix up that's already lost one copy of maybe one of my best cards.
Yeah.
Okay,
Uh, I'm going to talk about Glare and Swagger at the same time because they're counterparts to each other. Um, Glare is funny, and also it's on Hiragi. Baiken does not usually need an action compressed retreat effect, but maybe she does. Maybe her hand says, "I really want to be at range 2 instead of range 1." And but I also really want to use my ability, and this lets you set up a board state where you can do that.
okay,
But you're mostly going to be representing Hiragi as an offensive threat as its attack, similar to Yozansen, where these deliberately offer you niche utility so that you want to play the attacks that are more important to the character's identity more.
okay. Sure, yeah. These are two of her iconic things that she does. Um, there's also going to be times this is explicitly a counter attack. There's also going to be times where playing this will kill me. If I'm
Very
really
true.
at very very low life, all of a sudden glare to set up on curve slash or something is gonna do more for my game plan maybe than Hiragi will.
That is true. Because it has 2 armor on it, it does have more defensive utility in the late game than, for example, sweep, but it is limited.
Okay, that works. Um, and then if we're talking about it at the same time, oh yeah, it's the same. It's backwards. It's
Yeah.
close in instead. Okay,
And this one is on Karatakori, a shape that is harder for us to represent because it only hits at range 1. And we like range 1. We also like range 2, and we also like range 3. And we're usually not going to be doing a lot of fighting for positioning because we have competent options everywhere. but that also means that we don't necessarily naturally trend towards range 1 where this is consistently available as a threat. And also, this is flexible positioning, and it's flexible positioning in the direction that we actually want to go in. So swagger actually gets boosted a lot more than glare, just because of those factors of being on a somewhat generally speaking worse attack and giving us positioning that we like a lot more. And notably, both of these are extremely flexible in their positioning because they're up to, so you can do 0, 1, or 2 in
Right.
the direction that it lets you move in,
Right.
which Guilty Gear characters don't get flexible movement. They get inflexible movement because it's action compressed. Well,
Right.
Baiken has flexible movement that is action compressed. On a
So
character that is this good on defense and on offense, action compressed flexible movement is extremely strong to have as an option.
I can play footsies. I can move one and do like a little bit of micro spacing and then blow my opponent up with a range specific option, or I can dart all along the board like every other Guilty Gear character can.
Yep.
Um, these are, I believe, my only other movement boosts in terms of
Yes.
like pressure on these as well. I was going to say in terms of pressure on these, I might be trying to use them, or I might need to use them more. I forgot about this. I have
Yeah.
plenty of ways to keep my opponent close. I might not need to crutch on these that often.
And I mentioned that Baiken has options as far as canceling, and that does include on glare and swagger. These are close up to 2, draw 1. That is still relatively efficient. So if you don't actually need to spend your gauge and you're like trying to build for Tsurane, Sanzu Watashi, or your Exceed mode, you don't need to cancel this. You're Baiken. You have reasonable defensive options. You probably went to a range where you're really good anyways, because you boosted swagger. Of course, you went to a range where you're really good.
Right. You wound up at range 3, 2, or 1 when you boosted this. You're good at those ranges.
Yeah. So if you don't feel pressured to spend your gauge if you don't need the action compression, you might not need the action compression. And also, maybe you do need the action compression.
Yeah.
It's
It
kind of going to be up to you and your hand what you need in this moment. And these are boosts that offer you a lot of flexibility in exactly how you're getting your value by being giving you options to give yourself stats in an action compressed way and give yourself positioning in an action compressed way or not.
right. Okay, sure. And I mean, like you're talking about. I noticed, by the way, Blue, that the kind of character that you tend to play is a very flexible character. I think that's one of the things that appeals to you about them,
Yes.
which sets it makes gives you a very hard job as expert on one of these guides where we're trying to be prescriptive. Like sometimes the answer actually is like, listen, man, you got good tools, figure them out, and that's the best we can do. And I feel like Baiken in particular, we're gonna have to crutch on that pretty hard. Everything that you just described is good and useful, but Exceed is a very there's a lot of scenarios that can come up. You will have to find ways to navigate them yourself, I think.
Yeah, and Baiken, especially the theme of our boost kit, especially is flexibility. The theme of these attacks over here, Henji Kobari and Tatami Gaishi, is flexibility. The character has a lot of flexibility inbuilt into them to make it so that the opponent just kind of has to play Exceed into her, and then she plays Exceed really well. I really like
Yeah,
characters that are mostly just playing Exceed and have
yeah.
good flexibility in doing that.
Because as we said at the beginning of the lesson, Exceed is fun and you can play it for fun. If you're
It
playing a
is an
character that plays
extremely
Exceed,
expressive game as well.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've got lots of flexible movement tools. I have some flexible gauge generation tools. I also like. It doesn't really sound like I need a set in stone game plan when I am regularly hitting for 7, 7, or X kick. Um, like these are. It kind of sounds like Baiken is a character who can get by without a huge amount of like grand strategic consideration in exchange for having very good tactics and like deciding what you need in the moment and making use of that stuff. Because like I don't know how much I need a payout when I have 7, 7 and axe kick. I can find it in the moment and get there. It seems like pretty well.
Yeah, and in that regard, because Baiken likes it when you play her with a middling hand size, she is mostly going to be focused on a more tactical playstyle, as you're describing, where you're thinking about how to get value in the moment, you are still doing option management decisions because let's say you get both Yozansens early. Well, if you throw both Yozansens early, you don't have Yozansen anymore. You probably might want to reshuffle then.
Right.
Um, I am a noted reshuffle action hater, and I actually found myself in the situation where all of my guarded tools, the Tamigaishi Hiragi, and then also I think Yozansen were all down, and it's like, well, I need those cards because of the matchup I'm in, so I'm taking a reshuffle action right now and hoping that I get one of my Guardy cards back so that I can continue representing them as threats.
Right. Even blue, even just CC through the rest of your deck to trigger the automatic reshuffle blue will sometimes reshuffle to get like they're that important that you'll do that.
They're that important, and also oftentimes for a character that is going to be more focused on the moment and also has like kind of funky wild swings, although not the worst at range 2 especially. Um, Sometimes you're just gonna have to eat that turn of lost pressure.
Right. And I can play at a slower pace. That's not the end of the world unless my opponent is determined to make it the end of the world, but it's still not what I'd like to do.
Yep.
Okay. Sounds
And
good.
we have one boost left to talk about,
Yes.
Mirror of the World. It's a stun immunity boost. Stun immunity boosts are always big and cool. It
Hmm.
also means that we have another tool to check opponents that are determined to make our life difficult, either by hitting us so hard that our really solid guard values are not enough, or alternatively, really speedy opponents by making it so that some of our options are way more consistent because they now effectively have infinite guard on them. Something like
Right.
Kabari or Kenju.
Right.
These have big range, they don't have any guard on them. If the opponent can somehow contest the speed of these, can they contest the speed of those and the range and also infinite guard?
Right. I mean, Hiragi also seems like an obvious
This
because
that's the dream is
it
Mirror of the World on Hiragi because of the before effects on Mirror of the Worlds, which
yeah
is if the
we got to
opponent
talk about
hits
that.
you, you gain power equal to the amount of damage that you have taken, which the combination with Hiragi there is obvious. You
Yep.
gain 6 off of getting hit by Hiragi, period. And then if the opponent plays slash into you and you play a 0 armor Hiragi, well, the opponent is going to eat 11
Oh yeah.
with Mirror of the World. Because that's such a dominant threat, the opponent is never, ever, ever going to let you actually do Mirror of the World Hiraki. Most of the time, what they're going to do is they're going to initiate with something slow that it's hard for you to do, or just straight up block. Well, if they're trying to diffuse your stun immunity by playing block, I hope they're at a range that is not 1, 2, or 3 because they might eat a Yozansen otherwise.
Yep. Yeah. All right.
Yozansen or
That's
Dust.
or dust. Yeah. And I mean, if they try to underspeed my Hiragi, I've got dust. Um, that's this is uncapped damage, right? Like I can hit as hard as my opponent can and then some.
Yep.
Okay. How is this a flex or is this actually like a practical tool?
This is legit, in my
Okay.
opinion.
Okay.
I actually boost a lot of Mirror of the Worlds, not necessarily because I'm banking on that before effect. The before effect is spice, it's sauce, it's great stuff, but it's a stun immunity boost, and just having a stun immunity boost as an option is extremely valuable on a character that has all of the flexible tools that Baiken has. It's another tool in the arsenal. Sometimes you need stun immunity to be able to represent the option of forcing a trade into the opponent or literally forcing a trade into the opponent. And in that regard, you can think of it as a tool that allows us to answer a lot of setups that we might run into that our kit might otherwise have trouble with, whatever those setups might be.
Sure. It's actually kind of similar to what its attack is doing. It's saying, do I need an 8 speed? Well, here's an 8 speed. Do I need stun immunity? Well, here's stun immunity. If I don't need them in that particular matchup, well, that's I got other uses for other cards. I can play other things on my turn. But this card, both sides of it are patching up holes that would otherwise exist. Is am I thinking about that right?
That is reasonable, and also Mirror of the World is a pretty reasonable thing to just lead with because matchup and in pretty much any matchup, I have stun immunity means my assaults are now free. I
Hmm.
can just like hit you with assaults, and you probably can't do anything about it. Or slash, but yeah, no, same card.
Yeah. Okay. So, and basically, if I'm thinking I'm likely to hit anyway, but I'm using, I mean, like it kind of has similar utility to like faultless defense.
Yeah, you can think of it as a deluxe, non-cancelable version of Faultless Defense in that regard, where it
Okay.
gives you even more. It gives you different value, but it is going to be passing turn in exchange. But we're Baiken. We don't have the worst defense in the world, despite being a Guilty Gear character.
Oh, sure. All right. I'm happy to crutch on Katami Gaishi or whatever else I want on defense. Like that's not super scary to pass turn as Baiken. Okay. So that's my kit. Lots and lots of very flexible options, lots and lots of really brutal mix-ups. Utility boosts, kind of this weird like hand mini game that I need to be like feathering, kind of like I need to be hitting in that sitting in that 3 to 5 card sweet spot in hand. Um,
You want to do that? I will note explicitly. You don't need to worry about that too hard if you don't want to worry about that, because what's your worst case? Your worst case is that this is not an attack anymore. Unfortunate, but not the end of the world. This isn't a super strong attack anyways.
right.
Hiragi is still as threatening as ever, and this is just a regular mid speed instead of being the world's dumbest mid speed. But it
Right.
still is a good and very functional mid speed. And also, most of the time that you want to do a big Yozansen setup, you probably will have it anyways. And then this one is just a boost. Oh no, it's just a boost, a
It's
very
just
threatening
mirror of the
boost that
world.
forces opponent play patterns.
Yeah. All
So
right.
if you don't want to play the hand mini game, you don't need to play the hand mini game. And oftentimes you will find opportunities where even if you're not actively playing it, you still get to play it and get the value of it anyways.
Right.
I
And
pinged over here, but I was Yozansening.
sure. The hand minigame is also not as hard as it looks because I do have some flexible gauge generation from my hand. I can EX attack, I can cancel things. It's not that hard to find ways to hit that sweet spot if I need to.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. All right. All of that is really scary and 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 I mean scary for my opponent, also slightly scary for me because I'm going to be making some fun decisions over the course of the game. Do we want to talk some normals?
Sure. I don't think there's going to be much crazy that I shed light on with the normals, because Baiken uses the normals in very normal ways. She's a character that mostly plays Exceed, and all of these tools are here to accent the utility that normals give you as a default by giving you things that the normals don't do, things that the normals don't necessarily do as well. Basically just an extra copy of sweep, and then big fun mid speeds. This is an inverted mid speed, but so this is an extra copy of a slow, but so grasp is grasp. It is the range one counterpart to Hiragi Karatakawari. It's not as expensive as Surane Sansuatashi, and it represents the same kind of idea of here's my fast button, lol.
Okay.
Um, it's not something that we are desperate for. We're not so mix-up-y, and also not so range one mix-up-y that grasp is like, oh my god, I love this card. It is a way to confirm power, a thing that we can cheaply buy with our exceed mode, and our exceed mode thus makes grasp stronger. If we do a range two pull to range one, we now have a 4 power grasp and also the counterpart 6 power Yaozansen. That also can very easily be a 5 power grasp or 7 power Yozansen, and that's a very threatening mix-up if the opponent has to deal with it.
Right.
So we like grasp. We don't love grasp. We like Let's Rock. We aren't dying for gauge, but we do obviously have uses for gauge, pretty reasonable, compelling uses for gauge. So, and confirming Let's Rock isn't the hardest thing in the world when you have the sign curve button that really loves it, especially if you have the EX, in which case it might be a pyrrhic victory, but it is a victory that still involves the opponent eating 7 at speed 7.
Yeah, it's also not Pyrrhic if it kills them, right? That's pretty
True,
permanent.
true.
Like if they have
Uh,
7 health left, it's the game's over.
we have a Tatsu-esque shape with Hiragi, where like we can just throw this at range 1 and then it'll probably hit into the opponent's thing, so we can confirm the value of Let's Rock. We
Right.
have fast options, we have consistent options. We have reasonable ways to cover and confirm Let's Rock if we really want to play Let's Rock. So both halves of this card are something we appreciate, but not something that we are dying for, if that makes
Okay.
sense.
Okay.
Cross is a card that Baiken also isn't like dying to use because it upsets our positioning, but also if we defend with it, our positioning isn't actually that upset that badly. So we can defend with cross more consistently than a lot of other characters because we have ways to just come back into a range where we actually have things we want to do.
Right.
So this card is more available to us than it is for a lot of other characters that have the offensive momentum and shape that Baiken has because flexibility is the name of the game.
Right.
Um,
Going to range 5 is not so bad if I can get back to range 3 right away.
yeah.
Okay.
So cross, not the worst. You probably are going to want to defend with it if you're playing it because again, we're not like dying for a fast shape, and also we have probably a fast shape that's even more rewarding to play that doesn't upset positioning if we're
Right.
initiating.
Right. Right.
Area shift is good if we really want gauge and to get rid of this copy of cross in our hand, but we basically have area shift as our ability, especially in exceed mode.
Oh, okay. That's a good way to put it to think about it. It doesn't give me the key charge auto cancel thing, but this already kind of is an auto cancel, and you sort of talked about that before, so it actually is pretty similar.
Yeah, so like we're not dying for the value of area shift. Also, you're never pushing with area shift. We're not a zoner.
Right.
Um, so like there isn't an insane amount of pressure on this card, which also means that it's very easy to just find yourself with the EX, which means you can defend with EX cross, which is an extremely consistent defensive option that also conveniently lowers your hand. Um,
True.
and that means that you can do a lot of cool plays, and also because we don't have a lot of pressure on this card, that just means that our defensive game is just that little bit better.
Makes sense. Okay. Um, Easy to use, kind of valuable no matter or like however I'm going to use it because cross is just a strong card. Uh, Neither of these so far have like they're doing things as you said they're doing things that my specials aren't doing, but they're not like incredibly valuable game defining things for Baiken.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Slash, Slash is a card that Baiken actually, in my opinion, does appreciate a lot, especially when she's doing Exceed mode strats, because the pull 2 on Exceed mode, combined with our best range probably being 2, just from the way the kit is shaped, Yozan-sen being on curve at range 2 is the big difference maker there,
Right. Right.
means that we actually want to, when we gain advantage, be at range 1 if we are trying to use our ability at the same time, which means that we actually appreciate Slash leaving us at range 1 versus Kabari leaving us at range 2 with advantage.
Assuming we are using our character ability to bump our strike up, especially.
Assuming we're in Exceed mode, yes. If we are
Okay.
not in Exceed mode, then this is just an extra copy of Kabari that is short range instead of long, and is middling in power instead of having low or high power, depending on your choice.
Right.
Um, because we have two assault but long shapes in addition to our copy of Slash, this is another shape that we don't have like an extreme amount of pressure on, which also means that we can, if we want, boost dash. Um, I think that Baiken likes both halves of this card reasonably, but isn't like dying for the utility of them. I know I've just said that with all of the fast cards.
Right.
Baiken is a real mid-speed maestro, if you get what I'm saying. But I think she does like Slash more than Cross or Grasp because it at least advances her game plan, generally speaking, if she plays this attack.
Okay, sure. I mean, I'm getting advantage. I'm going to a range I like. I can probably find many things to do at that range. I can start snowballing a little bit. That all makes sense to me. How about dive?
We have an extremely strong boost kit, and an extremely strong boost kit that involves a decent amount of action compression. We really appreciate dive as an attack that we can play that'll probably beat the opponent. Um, the only real consideration with dive is that usually we're going to be at a range where dive doesn't actually hit range 1 or range 2. Those are the most common places that Baiken ends up
Right.
of her own volition, just because of how her kit is shaped.
Right.
So that's the main problem with dive, but it's a long range option. It's a long range option that we can make basically guaranteed to at least give us distance, thanks to Mirror of the Worlds. And if the opponent makes a horrible mistake and plays a, I don't know, Ryudoken at range 4 into your Mirror of the World dive, well, congratulations, it's party time.
Yeah,
That's never
absolutely.
going to happen unless the opponent
No.
makes a horrible mistake. But, you know, Dive is a card that is appreciated because we have a boost kit that makes dive more threatening, and Ukemi, especially because we're a character that can actually play at a more middle pace, is a boost that's more relevant to this character. Obviously, we have other options to answer opponent boost setups. I have more stats than you thought I did, and I'm going into a strike. I'm at a different position than you thought I was, and now we're going into a strike. I have sun immunity, but sometimes you just need to do the old get rid of that boost. I don't want to deal with it.
That works. In terms of the boost, excuse me, in terms of the boosts that we're putting on dive to make it really threatening, Deadeye stands out. It seems like as a on curve range 3 dive is probably just going to win the strike. Um, any means necessary seems like it'd be awesome on dive, but it's not cancelable and it's on Yozansen. What other dive boosts am I looking at here? A badass obviously is always good on dive.
Yeah, badass is great on dive. If you do badass and now you find yourself with a hand of 4 or less, you can do badass hidden weapon dive, and that is a 7 power dive that is speed 5.
Oh yeah, that's messed up. I actually sort of forgot that this is pseudo cancelable already, despite having talked about it like 10 seconds ago. Um, this is a consideration even without badass, but I've got the, you know, okay, now you can't defend with sweep if I badass dive into hidden weapon. All right, so yeah, I've got some stuff.
Yeah, and hidden weapon, especially like not having any additional costs on it, is part of what makes it extremely flexible. Which it's not tatami; it needs to be more flexible than the other two, even though these two are also really great shapes.
Right.
Just tatami is a very very easy card to play, so it needs to have a boost that is about as easy to play, but in different circumstances.
Yep. Yep. No, I get you. But so dive is as always a good boost delivery mechanism, and I have good boosts, so I can probably make a good use of this card. How
Yeah,
about
like it's not flashy and it's not like earth shattering, but it's always nice to have a card that appreciates having boosts on it in a kit that has pretty decent boosts
yep, yep.
for just like ensuring that dive gets some amount of value, even if it's not like full optimal value.
Yeah, I can do something with these. I can make this a consideration as long as I'm at range. How about dust?
Dust is a card that we like because we have a bunch of things that make the opponent want to play slows, namely Hiragi, and then also a couple fast cards that trade with slows, a few fast cards that trade with slows.
Right,
Uh, so Dust can serve as our regular, much lower value version of Yozansen that we can represent in the early to mid game so that we can save our Yozansens for when they're even more brutal and destructive.
right,
Uh, and in that regard, sometimes the opponent has like something that covers Yozansen, but for some reason it loses to Dust. A very common one in that regard would be a speed dodge, which are relatively common in season 6. Which is those are usually attacks that are speed 5 or greater do not hit you. Those cover Yozansen. A lot of those lose to Dust because even if you're doing a, for example, Deadeye uh, cancel +1 speed. If you actually play the Yozansen, that's a speed 7 Yozansen, pretty brutal in a lot of matchups. That's a speed 4 Dust. So the opponent now has to decide, am I covering the thing that only it loses to a speed dodge, or am I covering the thing that is way more beatable but beats my speed dodges?
right,
So matchup specific considerations there, but sometimes you like having Dust as a slower option that has guard versus Yozansen, which is just screw you, I'm super duper fast.
right. And even outside of that, outside of those matchups where I need slow worse Yozansen, cool. Now I have less pressure on my Yozansen. As you said, I can save it for the late game. I can still be aggressive early on with ignore armor, ignore guard.
Yeah, and notably because this has ignore guard as well, it does beat sweep. So if you're making a big show of like, oh yeah, I'm doing hidden weapon Yozansen, I'm gonna hit you for 6, your focus and block are dead. Well, the other side of that mix up is, and this is true for Ken as well, sweep and dust. So now the opponent has to remember, wait, I can get my sweep stunned by one of these cards, and if I lose to this, especially, that really sucks.
Yeah, that's messed up when that happens. Um, Sweep should never lose. Sweep should never win clean, right? It's really scary when that happens to you.
It
Um,
certainly
how
is.
how about faultless defense?
We don't have any of the like, oh man, this is like a really great use for it as a canceled boost. A lot of the other characters I mentioned have. We have some stuff with big range, but most of the stuff that has big range also has guard on it anyways, or
Right,
is so fast that it doesn't need guard in the form of Kabari and Kenju, which also notably don't hit at range one. If these did hit at range one, then it would be a different story. So Falls Defense is a boost that we appreciate mostly for making the opponent scramble a little bit to try to answer it if we pass turn, similar to a lot of other Guilty Gear characters. Obviously, if we're actually dying for gauge rather than trying to force the opponent's hand, we have ways to just
just
build gauge.
put gauge in our hand, or put stuff from hand in our gauge on our own.
And we actually, as mentioned, because of how our kit is shaped, do appreciate the value of dust as a shape a decent bit, and we can also make it land with reasonable consistency. You probably do still play FD just because, like, no matter how much neutral utility you give to a Guilty Gear character, they still are stuck with the Guilty Gear normals, which only offer you so much in terms of neutral utility. And
Right,
sometimes you just need to pass turn with 4 guard because your hand says that that's what you should be doing, and you already have used your Mirrors of the World, or you don't want to use your Mirrors of the World.
right, yeah, because these do have some overlap. This is 99 guard instead of 4 guard, or unignorable guard instead of 4 guard or something, but similar utility. Okay, so mostly dust. Then I'm looking for. I feel like sweep is going to be very similar to what we talk about sweep every time, which is that it's very, very good and badass is very, very good.
Yeah, yeah, and for the specific utility that Baiken brings to the sweep table, because obviously I talked a lot about characters that had trivial ways to buy plus power. Well, Baiken's got a relatively
Oops.
trivial way to buy plus power as well. Um, but aside from having our sweep beat sweep um, for a fairly low cost, um, sweep is a strong shape. It's a strong, consistent shape. We have an extra sweep shape in the form of Tatami Gaishi, so we actually aren't like the only thing that we're dying to get from sweep that Tatami doesn't offer us is literally power, which
Right.
obviously sweep's got plenty of that for us. Badass is actually really really strong on Baiken's kit because I mean just look at her shapes and then add 1 to all the stats. Tatami becomes basically unbeatable. Kabari becomes both more threatening and much harder to actually answer. Um, Kenju is basically unavoidable. Yozansen is
Is
basically
Yozansen?
unbeatable. Yeah, Yozansen is extra Yozansen, and
Right.
also you can pretty easily do like Baddest cancel hidden weapon into Yozansen, and that just wins.
Yep. Pretty much. Pretty much. That I mean that's a it's a 1 2 7 7.
It certainly is.
That's messed up. That's too many numbers.
Hiragi does not like getting plus speed, so you probably are not doing Baddest Hiragi unless you're trying to prove to your opponent that you really are genuinely crazy.
Yep.
And Karatakari is a mid speed that hits for 7 innately. Hitting for 8 is a big deal because that means you stun focus as well. And you're stunning focus at speed 5, and speed 5 is a little bit harder to answer than speed 4 is in terms of like wild swing dynamics if the opponent chooses to just wild swing into your badass.
Right. Okay. So that's the entire kit except Hiragi that you just named.
Yeah, yeah.
It enables everything that I'm doing. It's already really good on slash dive dust even. There's plenty of uses for badass even among just the normals.
Yeah, I will note something that I find a little unique about Baiken is I actually, although oftentimes I'm not even going to play badass, but if I similar to what I said with her regular boosts, badass no cancel has some real utility on Baiken just because her her defensive mix-up is about as strong as her offensive mix-up when it's backed by an EX because Yuzansen is still a dragon punch that hits for 6 if you're playing it on defense with
That's
EX.
that's very compelling. You don't really need it doesn't enable the same kind of when you're not canceling it, it refunds a card to your hand. It might be a little bit harder to play, but yeah, I'll do a DP that hits for 6. That's fine.
Yeah, so like unlike a lot of other Guilty Gear characters, I wouldn't say that playing badass is necessarily married to you canceling it. So let's say you want the gauge for something else. You don't need to cancel your boosts. You really don't need to cancel your boosts relative to a lot of other Guilty Gear characters because you, in a lot of ways, aren't really a Guilty Gear character. You're more of a Street Fighter
You're
character.
kind of a Street Fighter. Okay, cool. Um, how about focus?
Focus provides valuable defensive utility that allows us to nope out of strikes. Obviously, we have other options to allow us to do very similar things to focus. We still appreciate focus because focus is focus, and no matter how good our defensive options are, we don't have anything that's speed one. When the opponent tries to play dumb speed games with us,
Right,
where they're trying to beat Mirror of the World by initiating the sweep or something.
right. So this is the slowest you can go and still hit with Mirror of the World, but also it's focus, and focus doesn't really need an introduction.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not doing the best of jobs at selling, these slows are great and you should probably be playing them, but it's like you hopefully already know that these slows are great and you should probably already be playing
Right.
them.
Yeah. These are the cards that the first time you ever play Exceed, you hit with a sweep, and like dopamine is released in your brain, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand why people like this game. They're just good. They're like the gold standard for cards in some ways.
And like I mentioned with sweep, like we can pretty trivially buy plus power with hidden weapon and our exceed mode especially, which
Right.
those are great tools to make sweep very scary and also very scary in a way that complements Yozansen really nicely.
Right.
Because a Yozansen that is speed 6 and hits for 6 power is asking the opponent to dragon punch you or to play sweep. Well, congratulations. Most dragon punches and sweeps are going to lose to a 7 power sweep. Focus doesn't have that kind of specific utility, but it's got armor. It's got after draw 1. It doesn't disrupt positioning. It does a lot of things we still appreciate. So never count focus out because it's great and it's consistent in a way that a lot of our kit isn't necessarily consistent. So it's also something that we appreciate just because characters appreciate slows. Um, Scramble, everyone's favorite boost, is a boost that we can make great value out of, assuming we actually want to play it, because it turns out that 90% of the cards that exist in Exceed lose to Yozansen.
And they're probably holding the ones that do beat Yozansen in their hand because they know you have it.
Yes. The other thing, though, is 90% of the cards in the game lose to Yozansen, which means Yozansen already implicitly has a scramble effect on it.
Hmm.
So despite Scramble enabling us to get a relatively guaranteed Yozansen payout, actually playing Yozansen or even making good on the idea that we might be playing Yozansen with badass hidden weapon, etc., is already a pretty good way to get the opponent thinking about wild swinging anyways. So um, we kind of loop around back from have a dominant threat that Scramble enables. Oh, dominant threat's so strong, opponent is going to wild swing anyways. Oh, we can abuse that. Oh, that means that we don't actually want to scramble. So we're kind of back to yeah, scramble is a thing that allows us to diffuse specific setups, mostly relating to opponent EX attacks or if they have like boosts in play, especially greedy boosts, then you can do it and then cash out with a probably Yozansen, maybe something else.
Okay, but so you're using it as a diffusal tool rather than as a confirm into your big scary thing.
Yeah, because this needs no confirm. You
Right.
just
It
you
is.
just play it, or even just make an active playing it, and the opponent is probably going to respect it.
Yep.
And
Yep.
until you force them into Yomi layers, in which case now you're playing a two-player game, and it's more about reads than it is about dominant
Value.
threats, anyways.
Yeah. Sure. And then how about block?
Block is a card that, just like every other character, you don't like playing because it's expensive. It basically is a guaranteed way to lose a strike in the lowest amount possible that you're losing, but you are still losing.
Yep.
Um, interactions with into interactions that block has into a lot of other cards in the game are not great. If you block an ultra, it's great. This does have some funny utility on Baiken, where if you have a massive hand for some reason, you can nuke it and then go into low hand payout of some kind.
Oh,
But
interesting. Yeah.
I don't think that playing block is notable for just that reason, because like you'd probably be better off just like initiating a few strikes to lower your hand than playing block and throwing everything in the garbage instead. Um, Obviously, you have reasons to use gauge, but you're not so gauge hungry that you are looking at the after add this to your gauge effect on block and going, hell yeah, it's
Right.
time to go.
It's time to
Um,
initiate with block at range 4, turn 1.
yeah. Which like you might still do just to see if the opponent flinches and plays a sweep, which, you know, they might. You have Kabari.
Right.
So it's not the worst thing to do in the world, but it's a cheeky play rather than a play that is part of your Swiss Army knife of ways to actually build gauge, period.
Right.
Parry, though, I've talked down Parry on most of the other characters that I've covered from season 7, but I will say that Baiken, due to her more defensively competent shape relative to a lot of the other much heavier rushdown characters that I've talked about, doesn't mind taking a turn off to get rid of an opponent threat that she has trouble dealing with.
Okay.
Now, obviously, an opponent threat that she has trouble dealing with is a very specific and very special kind of card, but if the opponent is blessed with a very specific and very special kind of card, Parry offers you something real that you might not necessarily be able to get because you aren't going to be able to play at the breakneck tempo of a May, Giovanna, or Soul.
Right. All right. And I don't have to play at that tempo, so I can take a turn off. I'm not going to be able to get to that speed anyway. Might as well. Um, just make sure that I'm looking at my kit. There really aren't that many things that I couldn't deal with somehow.
Yeah, and um, like with that in mind, I still don't love playing Parry, but I will more happily do it on Baiken than I will on a lot of the other characters because, as mentioned, her pants aren't on fire.
Yep.
She's not trying to set the opponent ablaze and get them out of here before she herself burns to death. She's just playing a regular game, and sometimes regular games require you to do a bit of hand disruption to keep them rolling in your favor.
Yep. Sure. Okay. All right. So that's everything she's got. I got a couple of questions before we wrap it up. One of them I mentioned I wanted to talk a little bit about economy because we've talked about great use cases for all of these things. Um, I don't see a whole lot of I've got a little bit of card draw here and there that's going to top me up. I've got some on Surami Gaishi because that gives me everything. Um, how much am I going to need to crutch on like universal actions like move or change cards? Is that a important consideration for Baiken?
Um, I don't find myself needing to CC that often with her, mostly because if she's at a middling hand size, she's filling anyways.
Right,
So it's mostly a question of like if you've blown out your hands, but you have like some ultras engaged, you probably should spend those to get yourself back to a middle hand size. And it's pretty easy to get these ultras into gauge just because they're extremely consistent shapes.
right,
Um, the walk action is usually unnecessary because you have a lot of ways to position yourself flexibly via glare, swagger, and your ability.
sure, okay. So
And then you also just have like cards that hit at range 4 and 5, and also like things that recover positioning with Tatami Gaishi. So like I don't find myself needing to walk very often with her. Um, Prepare is a sometimes kind of food. You know, sometimes you can prepare. Sometimes you're in a good position and you don't mind just taking a turn off to get yourself from, you know, 2 cards to 4 or 3 cards to 5, um, or 1 card to 3. Although that still is kind of funny. Um, so uh, like fundamentally, the character plays exceed. So you're going to be doing universal actions some amount of the time for some reason, and it's mostly going to be about finding the when and why. If your hand is great on defense, then preparing just to bring yourself to a slightly higher hand size and allow yourself to keep momentum going is pretty reasonable because again the character has a competent defensive game.
Okay. So
Um,
in terms of how my economy interacts or conflicts with my payouts, though, I'm taking the stuff that I normally would. You mentioned that I'm occasionally going to CC ultras from Gauge or something, but it's like some characters are like, all right, here, like your payouts, your potential payouts are change cards, ultras. I'm sorry, your exceed mode, ultras, or the change cards action or something like that. I know that some
mhm.
season 6 characters change cards from Gauge all the time. Baiken isn't really going to be doing that. She is building resources to spend the resources, not to take universal game actions.
Yeah, because her kit offers her most of what she needs as far as positioning, and even the middling amounts of card draw she has are enough to keep her in the positions that she mostly wants to be in. It really is a question of, am I in a position where I am comfortable preparing just to like give myself a couple extra cards so that in the next 5 turns I have reasonable plays to do, more
Right.
so than, oh man, I have no hand because I blew out my hand going crazy, and I have 7 gauge. Let me just go ahead and quickly refill my hand in its entirety.
Right. Sure. And so most of my economy is going to be geared towards the payout of my choice, and that could be a cancelable boost or a series of them. It could be a big ultra. It could be my exceed mode. Any advice now that we've gone through everything that she can do on evaluating what payout I'm looking for? Is it a matchup thing? Is it an in the moment thing? Do you have a preference? Like, are you an exceed Baiken player versus an ultra Baiken player? Does that distinction even work for Baiken?
Generally speaking, she has enough resource generation and confirm that you actually don't need to worry that much about, am I doing this, this, or this? And it can be just more of a in the moment and also playstyle kind of consideration. I think the one where it is a real commitment that you need to think about relatively early is, am I going to exceed this game? Generally speaking, my goal is to exceed. I don't do it every time, but I like the value of the plus power just in terms of breakpoint math. It
Right.
makes, for example, Yozansen way scarier when it's pretty much permanently power 6 instead of power 5.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I mean, given how scary Yozansen is, that can be that can be a use case that is powerful enough to recommend the Exceed mode all on its own. But also, I like plus power on other things.
Yeah, yeah, and but even with that in mind, like if I find a Kenju in the early game, like I wild swing into it or something, and I can afford it, yeah, I'm gonna play it. If I find a situation where Tsurane Sanzu Watashi is the card I need, yeah, I'm gonna play it. Even if that means delaying my exceed mode, that's fine. Maybe I just don't exceed this game and I get my value other places.
Okay,
And like as far as gauge for canceling goes, it's mostly gauge for canceling badass or dash or swagger.
right,
So you don't actually have a lot of cancel pressure placed upon you either, and it's mostly going to be like, yeah, once in every game, I'm going to do this big ass, badass hidden weapon Yozan Sen confirm where the opponent just has to eat 7 or something,
right,
rather than um, a character like Soul, for example, who needs to always have 1 in the chamber and is playing 3 cards in every strike, but every strike hits for 7.
right. Yeah, get gauge, spend gauge, kind of momentum. And as you mentioned, several of the things that I can enable with my neutral plays don't even require canceling in the first place. So I can slow it down. I can I'm like the one Guilty Gear character who's allowed to do that. So my other payouts are enabled by that too. I can do an exceed mode. I can just play ultras. I can be
Yeah, and
flexible.
I know that's like the lame answer is like, yeah, like you as a player determine how you want to spend your gauge because it's more about what you as a player value and what you as a player are seeing. But I feel like that really is the answer with Baiken, even if it's the one that puts the most onus on the person that is presumably watching this tutorial for help on playing Baiken.
Oh, sure. I mean, this is helpful though. I mean, even knowing that you personally like the exceed mode, or but you will play the other stuff when they come up. I mean, that's plenty. That's a plenty useful place to get started from.
That is
Um,
fair.
yeah. Any other strategic considerations that you want to talk about before we get into counterplay and wrap the guide up?
Actually, and this ties into counterplay. I generally feel like Baiken is a character that is mostly just going to be about like playing the game, playing Exceed, better than the opponent.
Right.
So the way you beat her and also the way that you play her is mostly just going to be about playing Exceed better than your opponent or having the opponent play Exceed better than you. She doesn't have a lot of crazy tools or gimmicks. She just has a pretty strong card quality on average and some special tools that are pretty rare, but we've experienced before. We know what Axe Kick does to a character's kit, and this character is built around it much the same that Ken is.
So she's not doing anything weird. She's just doing things good.
Yeah,
Um,
she is like she's operating with the dial turned up, just slightly above average in terms of her general tools, but similar to the other characters, she's generally speaking fundamentally interactive. Like you can call out a Hiragi, you can call out a Karatakwari. The big one that is hard to call out in this regard is Yozansen, and also it's pretty hard to cleanly call out Tatami Gaishi. But say you're in a situation where it's clear that she is building gauge. Maybe denying the hit with the cross out is worth it, even if it still sets up a positioning that is not disfavorable for her. And in
right,
that regard, it is about playing what your character's strengths and playing them well, as it is her playing against your strengths and playing her strengths well. Um,
right.
what
Yeah,
I will say is you're probably going to have to hold a Yozansen. You can kind of think of it at the start of the game as you probably being at 24 life or so, but she if you answer everything else, even if you start at 24 or in the extreme instance 17 life, um if every other strike in the game is an unambiguous loss for Baiken, that's fine for you.
yeah. You still won by 17.
Or so,
Okay. Yeah,
because he
ish.
probably did
Sure.
like
Yeah,
a
you're
sweep
probably
trade in there or something.
trading into grasp or something, notwithstanding. Yeah, you can. It exceeds a game where you can come back. It's possible. You're
Yeah,
probably going to
and
take this loss, but that's not the end of the world.
because she has this big stupid threat, um, you can just parry it. Most characters have parry. Obviously, season six characters don't, but
Right.
season six characters hopefully have some kind of tool to answer a Yozansen if they don't have a parry.
Sure. They've
Which
got some
that's yeah, that's why they have the speed dodges and stuff.
yeah, some kind of silver bullet that does what parry could do to a card they can't deal with. That makes sense. Um, so yeah, you call her mix-ups, you out fundamentals her, you do the thing that your character does well because that's what she's going to be doing to you.
Yeah, and in that regard, I talked about Soulmei and Giovanna. Like their game plan into Baiken is going to be offensive pressure because Tatami Gaishi might be really good into most of the game, but it's much less good into a character that can hit for 6 at speed 5, which
Sure.
Soul and May
They
definitely
can.
can do.
Yeah.
And um, Baiken's defensive prowess is much less good when she's stuck with no cards in hand and is wild swinging and is mostly like a range 2e kind of character, which she is, versus Giovanna's range 3 kit shape.
Right.
So, for specific examples of other characters I've talked about, like it is really just play your character well, outplay the opponent, and um, be stronger.
Yep. Do your thing well. You please go watch the guide that I inevitably made or will make with other experts for your character and figure out what they do into Baiken because Baiken is not going to be doing anything that weird. She's going to be like if it works on other characters, it probably will. Like, she doesn't have any of those silver bullets for the most part. She just has Yozansen, which is really scary.
It's really scary, and it's also a really scary, mostly offensive threat. Although if you do lose to this on defense, tragedy has struck.
Yeah, that's a real problem for you. All right, well, Blue, it sounds like we've got everything we need to get the people going with Baiken to try her out. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
As with all my lessons, I'm going to end with just saying, I think that Baiken is a really cool character. I think she's really fun. Um, I think that, and I noted this with pretty much all of them because they're all generalist, all rounder characters with decent flexibility. But I think that she has a really solid matchup spread. Lots of fairly even, not too dominant matchups in either direction. Just off the back of having really solid tools. If you're interested in playing fundamentals oriented characters, and especially if you liked the old Street Fighter season, I would definitely check out Baiken. And in the inverse, if you like Baiken, maybe check out some of those Street Fighter characters that I mentioned earlier: Guile, Ryu. can, they all might give you something to like from an older set, and even a bit more concentrated neutral utility versus Baiken's more like middle of the road between Guilty Gear and Street Fighter neutral utility.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, as somebody who came into Exceed when season 3 was still competitively legal, and kind of these were the characters that I first really tried out in Exceed. Baiken's sort of pace and playstyle reminds me a lot of that, and is very comforting to see what that looks like, and to see that it still kind of functions in a Strive environment. So it's very cool to see that playstyle reappear again. So I'm really excited to try her out with the stuff that I've got from you here, Blue. Um, so as always, thank you so much for being an advocate for this character. Thank you so much for your expertise and your time, especially your time. This has been our fourth recording in a week. I really appreciate you helping me out here. Um, folks at home, thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Have a great day, everyone.